This is the Aware Families Podcast, the show that brings you a science-based, practical look at how to use the principles of functional medicine to keep your family healthy. Welcome back to the Aware Families Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Flass.
And I'm Brittany Coburn.
And we're glad to be back. We got a little bit knocked off schedule, so we're trying to get back on track, so we apologize. And just as a review, we ran through the 6 pillars of health in the first episodes there, kind of finished that up. And then last week we talked about something that's definitely more in my domain as a gastroenterologist, and the 5 things you need for a good number 2 and all about poop. And so today we're going to shift your gears yet again and do something that's definitely in your expertise, your wheelhouse, more so than mine, and talk a bit about women's health, hormones, perimenopause and menopause, and just kind of looking at that through a functional medicine lens. Yeah,
definitely something I think that is it's more and more in, mainstream media. We're hearing about it a lot. Mm-hmm. I think there's more and more podcasts out there, more and more interviews. But again, I don't think we can talk about it enough because there's a huge gap in what the knowledge that, women going through perimenopause and menopause have and, what's being shared.
Yeah.
So
traditionally hush, don't talk about it. Right. Makes people uncomfortable. Right. And then under kind of an underserved population. Hugely.
Yeah. It's kind of like poop, right? You don't always talk about it, but it's there. It's the same thing. And women, we spend a third of our life in menopause, right? Or perimenopause leading into menopause. Mm-hmm. That's a huge chunk.
Oh yeah.
Huge chunk. Yeah. Okay, so maybe we just start and I'll kind of chat about what perimenopause really is.
Yeah, so we'll go over that and I'll sort of ask you some questions, like, just so for our audience and for, all of our edification. So I guess, what is perimenopause? How do you define perimenopause?
Yeah, so I think it's almost easier to start by saying what is menopause. Menopause is literally one day in time, right? So it's one day, 12 months after you've had your last period or your last menstrual cycle, where you no longer are ovulating or putting out any more eggs to have a baby, right? Mm-hmm. Perimenopause is super fun. So that can be, it can be 10 years prior.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
The average age of menopause is 51.4 for Caucasian females. Think about 10 years prior, right? That's 41. But even in your late 30s, you can start having some symptoms because that's just the average age of menopause.
And is it potentially getting earlier, the perimenopause? I don't know what you've heard about that or read about that.
Well, and I think a lot of that, so the ages are, or the average age is a little bit different depending on ethnicity as well. Mm-hmm. And so, but with endocrine disruptors and all of these different things that you and I will talk about a little later.
Stuff, yeah.
Environmental changes. There's not a lot of literature or research out there right now showing that the average age of menopause is creeping up like we are seeing with menarche, which is that first age of a period. Mm-hmm. So that is something we're studying.
Which has definitely been hitting the press. You kind of hear about that more.
Totally, yeah. So, because you're hearing about it with kids.
In the
pediatric
and world, for sure.
Yeah. And so there, maybe this is something that research is going to be start investigating a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But so perimenopause, again, it is from when you start having irregular symptoms that can be in your 30s, your late 30s, and it can last 10, 12 years. That's not abnormal. Mm-hmm. And it goes all the way until you are 12 months without a cycle that you hit that day of menopause, and then technically you're postmenopausal after that. Mm-hmm. So, and symptoms are quite varied, which we'll talk about.
Okay.
So it's a long answer to an easy question, a short question, but it's a long, drawn-out answer.
So do you want to start talking about, since we're kind of talking about what is menopause, do you want to start talking about sort of the symptoms of menopause first, or the symptoms of perimenopause?
Well, and actually maybe, one other thing to bring up with menopause is that even though we start experiencing it, and the average age is 51.2, that doesn't mean somebody can't go into full menopause in their 40s. Mm-hmm. So they can, right? Yeah. And then you can even have, premature ovarian failure in your 20s.
Yes.
So, there are other reasons to go in earlier.
Which could be from a number of things, certain disease states, certain medications.
Yep. surgery, right?
Yep.
So if you have your uterus and ovaries out, so you can have a very sudden menopause
Yeah,
if
boom.
those, when they're taken out. And then even if you do if you do have a hysterectomy, which is just taking your uterus out, that does speed up the process by like 4 to 5 years on average.
So if somebody's got really bad fibroids
Yeah.
or, bad endometriosis or something like that, that could potentially really accelerate the whole process.
Yeah. So even if their ovaries are intact, so even if their ovaries are still present, it could speed the process up by, a handful of years.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the physiology behind that?
Yeah. So, and one of the other things I was going to say, and we'll jump into that with the symptoms a little bit,
Okay.
but so there's 3 main sex hormones that we talk about with perimenopause: estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. And so I think one of the funny things is I'll be talking to patients and people, friends, about testosterone. Like, women have testosterone too, right? So we have all 3. And we're, when we're born as a female, we have all of the follicles or all of the eggs that we're ever going to have. So as we start having cycles, we start losing those eggs, follicles, in hopes that they're going to be fertilized and then, create a baby. By the time you're 30, okay, this is from me over a 30-year-old, you are down to 10% of the total eggs you're going to have. And by the time you're 40, you are down to 3%. So, I mean, it's like a significant change, right?
And then fertility issues is probably the subject of a whole nother
game.
Yep, whole nother discussion.
And you can see, why, but we definitely can potentially have more issues with fertility.
Just a numbers game.
Just numbers, yeah. Let alone all the other things that can happen too. So that's always a huge thing. But as our brain starts to, so our body wants to kick out eggs because we want to kick out a couple of eggs every cycle in hopes that one of them will be fertilized. And so our brain is constantly working with our hormones to make that happen. And that's one of the reasons in perimenopause why symptoms start happening, because our brains are pushing to get these hormones to kick out, but they don't always want to kick out. Or we'll get an excess and then not enough. And then, and so it's
not the steady state. It's not as
Yep. So
regular.
We have these beautiful FSH, LH curves, where we know exactly what it's supposed to do throughout that 28-day cycle. And it changes. It starts to change.
So better define that, the FSH, LH.
Yeah, good point. So we have... So a typical cycle, right, for a female is like 28 days. And I mean, that would be a typical, they can range, from 22 to 34. Everybody is different. But that first half of the cycle is a follicular stage, and the second half is a luteal stage. And then you ovulate right in the middle. And we have different hormones. So FSH is follicle stimulating hormone, LH is luteinizing hormone. And they have to peak and then fall at certain points of your cycle so that you ovulate. So you put an egg out, right? So
and those are released from the ovary?
Yep.
But they are stimulated by
the brain. Yep. And so all of the pieces have to work together, right? And, but your periods can start to spread out. They can start to come close together. We can have heavy bleeding. We can have no bleeding. We can have spotting. That's just the bleeding part. So then when you start looking at like the symptoms you can have, I'm going to ask you a question now. When you think of perimenopause, menopause, what are the 2 main symptoms you hear about?
I mean, hot flashes and brain fog are probably the 2 biggest things that I typically hear about, and or fatigue.
Okay, yeah. And actually, brain fog is even one of it's a huge symptom because we have estrogen receptors in our brain, and that's kind of where that's going to end up coming out in our discussion. But most people hear of hot flashes and night sweats.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So those are, we call them vasomotor symptoms. And typically that is what people hear of. And one of the reasons that they're drawn to hot flashes and night sweats is that there are not many other things that cause those. Right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, well, that's menopause. Unless are hormones.
You take a whole bunch of niacin and then you get that flush kind of thing.
Right? Totally. Or tuberculosis. What I mean? There's some other things, but it's not as common.
Yeah.
Okay. But then we start thinking about, other things like heart palpitations, vertigo, right? So how many times have you attributed vertigo to perimenopause?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. You're, as a, pediatric gastro, you're probably not seeing a lot of vertigo, but, itchy skin.
I don't know.
Well,
With the advent of POTS, and things
Yeah.
like that.
No, well, and so, what relationship is there?
Yeah.
Itchy skin, so new rashes. But again, with the heart palpitations, you can have like that racing heart or that feeling of your heart doing a somersault, right? Which is kind of a heart palpitation or a PVC.
And do you know, like, what is that? Is that the loss of estrogen that's
So
kind of
we
doing
have
that?
estrogen receptors in our cardiac system. And
Okay.
so when we're starting to not fulfill that, they're not binding, then we are getting symptoms. And that's just it. We're getting head to toe symptoms because we have estrogen head to toe.
Because, sort of as the dude, you're kind of looking at it like, well, you're looking at the female anatomy, effects of it and not really thinking about, there are significant brain impacts and brain effects or heart effects or other systemic effects, muscle, all the other things. But you're right. It's a whole body thing that we're focused on, just sort of one area.
Right. So it's not just, heart palpitations, not just brain fog. And the other thing is we're all going to experience different symptoms. So weight gain, headaches, right? And then we already talked about kind of irregular cycles, so irregular bleeding. Vaginal infections are like UTIs, so bladder infections. They're actually really common when you start losing that architecture that we would normally have in our vaginal area.
Kind of atrophic effects.
Yeah. Yep. So we have skin thinning, we have hair loss, we have different things like that estrogen actually helps replenish and keep lush, kind of. And then
when you look at some of the other things sort of downstream from that, or I guess sort of time-wise downstream from that, that withdrawal of estrogen is thought to be like one of the things that can potentially trigger cognitive decline, Alzheimer's.
Yes.
There's that kind of loss of that trophic factor, the growth factor effect in the brain of estrogen. The cardiac effects, where all of a sudden, where women were protected a little bit from heart disease, then after menopause, all of a sudden those rates start to equalize or exceed that of males.
Yeah, we're at the same.
Because not just because of the palpitation thing, but just all the other sort of protective effects that had been there from estrogen. Yeah.
Totally. But then also, you mentioned the brain fog, but also just the other mental health pieces, right? So depression, anxiety, thoughts of suicide. So we have our peak suicide rates in perimenopause, which is terrifying. It's also like peak divorce rates, so it's like we're going through all of these things and a lot emotionally and can't always explain it, can't always, put a finger on it because, you might go into an appointment and be like, gosh, I'm having heart palpitations, I'm dizzy, and I am super depressed, right? You could end up leaving with an SSRI for depression, a referral to cardiology for your heart palpitations, and then, a whole nother, you might leave with 6 referrals. And really, it's an estrogen decline issue.
I was going to ask you too, in that same vein, have you seen much impact on like blood sugar regulation? That's impacted by all this.
So blood sugar, and cholesterol, right? So cholesterol is that parent hormone to those sex hormones, and so we will see a spike in cholesterol. And there's different kinds of estrogen, and one of the estrogens likes the fatty tissue. So yes, blood sugars I think kind of go along with all of that too, because those different phases of your cycle that I was mentioning, in that follicular phase and the luteal phase, we often will crave foods when we're in that luteal phase, and that phase can extend when you're in perimenopause. And so
maybe secondary to a bunch of other things. I don't know if there's an acceleration of insulin resistance or anything that you see during that time.
I haven't seen any studies that show just insulin resistance increasing that I can think of.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean they're not there or that they haven't done them.
Yeah. Right. I guess unless there's potentially like loss of muscle mass that then impacts lipids and glucose disposal, and then can affect blood sugars and things like that. So probably more secondarily. Yeah, potentially, because you mentioned osteoporosis. So we know osteoporosis, right, is when your bones are weaker. So you have an increased risk of fracturing a bone. So you fall, you trip something, and instead of bouncing like we do when we're young, you actually fracture. And so what happens is when we're younger, we have estrogen, and it is, like I said, it goes everywhere in your body. And you are
you're remodeling bone, and then you're building bone just as fast as you're remodeling when you're younger. When you get older, we start remodeling, but we don't rebuild as fast, and so then our bones end up being real porous.
So if you have not paid your future self by having weight-bearing exercise, weight training, things like that, then you're starting already kind of at a deficit point.
In your 30s.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk a little bit about that too. But one other point I wanted to make, since we're talking about bones, is the frozen shoulder. So frozen shoulder, hip pain, these are two super common occurrences in perimenopause. And it's a lack of estrogen. So we have estrogen receptors in all of those areas. And so you might have no other reason but having all of this shoulder pain, joint pain.
Is that because it changes the connective tissue?
Yeah, well, yes, because you have estrogen receptors all through that space, and they're not being filled. Yeah. So we have increased strain, increased tear. You can have adhesive capsulitis. Like, there's a whole slew of things that can occur. And so it should be one of those questions on the radar when you have someone a female in their 40s and they're going in because of hip pain, shoulder pain. Like, hey.
And what about that, that loss of muscle mass, that sarcopenia, that it happens when you're aging anyway, but how does perimenopause and menopause relate in with that? And is that tied in with the testosterone factor at all?
Right. So all of your hormones are going to decline. It's not just estrogen, right? So those other two that we talked about, progesterone and testosterone, even though we have significantly different rates from men, right? So men's testosterone is going to be much higher. We still have it, and it still does give us energy, and it does give us sex drive and different things like that are also super important. But having all of that combined is imperative to building muscle. So in the same way that we're losing bone, we're losing muscle and we have to actually work harder. So, I guess that kind of points me down to one of the things that we can do. We have a couple of people out there that you and I have talked about multiple times so far. But like Dr. Stacy Sims, so she's an exercise physiologist that has devoted her career to perimenopause and menopause and really helping people understand what it is you need to do and what you need to change when you hit this time frame in your life. And, when we're in our 20s, and even men can do this so, later, you can lift twice a week and you're going to build muscle and do great and not have a fat deposit and all of this stuff. And then for women, we are lucky enough that when we are in our 30s and then 40s, 50s, we have to be consistent about lifting, and we have to lift heavier weight to continue the muscle mass that we have and not lose it.
But then recovery times too, that probably also, changes, and then you can run the risk of overtraining, just like undertraining. So and I think that's a very personal thing depending on a lot of different factors. But, most people don't have the problem of overtraining, but I do, I'm sure you see it quite a bit as well. They're not allowing for recovery time, not getting good sleep, right. And then you lose that sort of buffer when you hit that perimenopause, menopause, and how does that affect your recovery time? And we'll talk about nutrition a little bit later too, but how does that impact your nutritional needs?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, it's a really great point. So I'll hold off on that comment until we get to diet, but I'm going to add a few more under the exercise pieces, because, we, for so long, I think of, what the heck is that gal's name who did all of the jazzercise and the Jane Fonda, right? Like the Jane Fonda workouts. Yeah. And so there's this desire to be thin and tall and, toned, but not look muscular, which is really a disservice to our bodies. And it does not protect us and our bodies when we're 80. Yeah. So we want muscle mass. We need muscle mass.
Muscle is metabolism.
Yep. And if we want to stay home and independent and hiking and biking and doing all of these things when we're in our 80s and 90s, right? Because I do. You have to put the work in when you're early. Yeah. And you have to start building that. And so it's lifting weight, it's doing plyometrics, so jumping.
Yeah, body weight stuff that's still weight bearing and causes that, good stress on the bones and the muscle and signals them to grow.
Yep, totally. And then the other one that Stacy Sims talks about a lot is doing that sprint interval training. And so her big thing, which I have embraced and feel like is super helpful. You do 30 seconds of super intense workout and then a minute and a half to 2 minutes of rest. And women only have to do that 4 or 5 times.
But you need to be healthy enough to do
right.
that.
Yeah. I'm not saying to jump in and do this.
Yeah.
Like work with your provider.
Going from couch potato to HIIT training,
Yes,
that's going to end you up probably in the emergency room. So don't do that.
Yeah.
Always work on your baseline, at the zone 2 baseline.
Yeah, and walk. Start walking.
Yeah.
Right? So that's my whole thing is I have people like, hey, let's start walking. If we're not doing anything, let's start walking. And particularly after meals, because then you can also help with that glucose regulation, right? Things you and I have talked about forever. Mm-hmm. And then if you can, start doing some plyometrics. And I talk about putting a piece of paper on the floor and jumping over it. Because then you're not going to trip, you're not going to fall because it's paper, right? But it gets your bones. You have to be jumping at like different angles. It actually is really good for your bones to help so you can keep remodeling and building. Mm-hmm. But these are easy ways to start. And then, start lifting weights and start with 5 pounds. Go up to, you know what I mean? You don't have to go to the gym. You and I have talked about this a lot. You can if it works. Find a friend, do it.
If you're motivated.
But a home gym, I've told you I have a home gym. That's what works for me. You like going to the gym, whatever works. Women, we like, and men too. I don't mean to exclude men, but we do like community. And so doing it, working out with a friend is an awesome way to start that process.
Yeah.
So diet-wise, though, you and I have both been talking about this, and everything we talk about with protein is huge for women. Mm-hmm. So, 80 to 100 grams a day typically is where I start with people.
Yeah, the kind of 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. And then this gets always argued too, the lean body mass versus not. And that's, but I think is a rough rule, that somewhere in that range is now becoming the more established recommendation. It used to be 0.9 grams per kilogram.
That's not enough.
It's not enough.
So I really say 20 to 30 grams for every meal. And the other thing is with women, you know how men can fast and then work out?
Oh, yeah. I was going to bring that up too.
Yeah. Women really shouldn't. And really shouldn't fast and then work out. We need to have some carbs before a workout because otherwise our body will go in. We have different fat deposits than men, and our body will jump into burning muscle instead of burning fat because it's like, wait a second, I need food, I need something. Where is it?
Well, and sort of premenopause versus peri and postmenopause, like how, because I know we've talked before about that if there are like intermittent fasting and if women are doing intermittent or total, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day or whatever, that the timing on that, depending on where you are in your cycle, it's also huge. Can really impact if it's harmful, helpful, how their body reacts.
Yeah. And so a couple things with that. One, I still don't think you should work out. And the studies really show that Dr. Sims has done that you shouldn't work out fasting. Like regardless. So if you're doing a fast,
as a female,
sorry, thank you. So if you're doing a fast, that's just not when you're going to do more than walk, right? And then, but yes, so when you remember those follicular and luteal stages we talked about. So day 1 of your period is day 1 of your cycle. And then that day up until about day 14 is your follicular stage. And that is the time frame when your body is actually it kind of does okay with fasting. So if you were going to do anything, that's the time to do it. And then that second half, that luteal phase, is when our body really doesn't want to fast and we actually want to eat a little bit more. We don't care for stress in that second half. Like that's when our body...
Because of course we all have that choice.
Yeah, I know. But progesterone and cortisol don't really... they don't like each other. And so if your cortisol's too high, then it kind of... You've heard of that cortisol steal. And so the thought is that your progesterone then is kind of bottoming out, and we need progesterone.
And so the steal, let's talk about that a little bit more. Like what is that? First of all, what is cortisol? Everybody's probably at least heard of it. It's sort of the stress hormone, but and then how does that sort of steal your other hormones?
So and we don't totally know, and there's a little bit out there on what's controversial about this or not. But essentially, cortisol is one of those downstream hormones. I like to talk about people like if you see a bear on a trail and you're hiking and you want to either get out of dodge or right, you want to fight or flight, that's cortisol like pumping up, right? It's the bear. Oh my gosh, what do I do? And so it is kind of like the end game of that hormone pathway.
That are all derived from
Cholesterol. Yep. And so what can happen is progesterone is up higher, right? And so women, we really need progesterone in our cycle. It helps us sleep. It helps us rest and relax. It's going to spike in that second half of our cycle. If we have high stress, high cortisol, it actually steals from that. And then we have less sleep, less rest. You might go to bed and not be able to fall asleep, or you might go to bed and then you wake up and then you're like, oh, I'm awake.
So have you found this, like if you have a patient and you do like a cortisol profile and you do estrogen progesterone kind of profile, do you see that like low, cortisol's up, progesterone low?
So it depends, because it really depends on when in the cycle you're drawing, right? And we could talk a lot about that too, but like on what hormones are great to draw. But I'll often check like the melatonin, cortisol together, right? And I want a nice high cortisol in the morning, a low melatonin, and then they kind of cross paths and reverse by the end of the day. So that's different versus when I'm checking any hormone labs, I do all of them fasting. And so we hope that your cortisol is higher anyway. But in the big picture, what people are telling you, if they have no progesterone and they have high cortisol, they are not sleeping well. So they're either not falling asleep well or they can't stay asleep. And these are the folks, right, that they might wake up in the middle of the night, maybe they have to pee, and then they are awake.
Or undiagnosed apnea,
right.
Sleep apnea,
yeah,
or
that can happen.
Those lines.
That happens too. But they might not be able to fall back asleep. Or you fall back asleep about 5 a.m. and then you got to get up at 6 because it's the day. And so you wake up exhausted.
Which I think we talked about this in the past too, about the overtraining piece of it, where I can't remember if Sims or who was talking about this, but these women who were probably, kind of in that perimenopausal phase, and they were really dedicated, like CrossFitter type of women, but they were getting up at 4 a.m, doing these gonzo workouts, then hard charging all day, and they weren't getting enough sleep, but they had this stubborn, they couldn't get to the fitness level that they wanted to. They had some stubborn weight loss. Their blood lipids weren't great, and
all of it.
And then somebody looked at it and it's like, dude, you need to sleep, and get your cortisol down.
And you need to back off the workout.
Yeah. And they would get better gains.
You need to eat more.
Eat more, sleep
better,
more.
And stop overworking out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, and they said it was unbelievable, like very definable by like blood lipid panels and doing like body composition analysis.
Well, that's what all her research is on this, right? So she's looking at a cellular level. So she's proving all of this.
And heart rate variability, I think, kind of, and that's the whole thing with the Morpheus, is like the training app part of it is like if you have a really low heart rate variability, measuring it in the morning at same conditions, fasting, all that, and if your heart rate variability is good, it's like, okay, you're rested, your cortisol is probably low, you can bang out a really good workout. Yeah. If you're like, oof, you don't want to push it, you need more rest, maybe you should just do like maybe a zone 2 type of workout, kind of like a steady cardio, but don't really, because if you keep pushing it when you're like that, you're going to end up losing ground instead of gaining ground. And I think probably women, it sounds like in that phase we're talking about, are probably more susceptible to that than 100%. At any other time.
Yep. And so she wrote 2 books, right? One is called Roar. One is called, oh dear. No, I can't remember.
It's called Oh Dear, I can't remember.
Okay, I can't remember the second one. Just finished. Oh gosh.
But what's her first name?
Dr. Stacey Sims. Yeah. And so she talks exactly about this. And, she'll talk about when you are working out, when is an optimal time for those hard workouts? And then when is it going to be where, hey, it's not a bad idea to tone it down a little bit.
Okay.
And it does. It matters. The time of our cycle, we're actually different, right? Like we're different. We have more get up and go at certain times than we do in others.
And dudes don't really, it's not even on our radar. We don't think about stuff like that.
Every single day it's like, do, right? And so we're different. And her big thing too is like, women are not little men. That's what it is. It's like, we're not little men. You can't treat us like little men.
In pediatrics, the mantra is like, kids are not little adults, right? So
it's the same thing.
Women are not little men.
Yeah. I mean, we're different. We have all kinds of different, obviously different anatomy, but like, there's only 4 other mammals that go into menopause, and they all live in the ocean. So humans are the only one that live on land that have menopause as part of our, like,
interesting.
Part of who we are.
Never heard that before.
Yeah. Wild, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're almost kind of going through like the 6 pillars
I know.
of perimenopause
Told you,
and menopause,
yeah.
because we talked about nutrition.
Yep.
We talked about sleep, I
Yeah.
think, which, we could obviously do a lot on that.
Yeah. Well, so sleep. Yeah. I'm trying to think of if I'm missing anything here too. Well, so we talked about like a lot of times I do give progesterone. Right? So, obviously everybody should talk to their own provider and figure it out, but it is something that might be beneficial. Magnesium glycinate goes a long way. You and I have talked a lot about magnesium glycinate, magnesium L-threonate, like all of those different options. Melatonin, a little bit of melatonin isn't a bad thing. Definitely can be helpful for sleep. But again, just like what you said earlier, if we don't sleep, we don't reset, right? I use the whole cell phone thing. What do you do with your cell phone at night? You charge it. How do you charge your brain? You have to sleep. That's it, right? And so if we're not sleeping, whether it be because we can't or we're choosing other things or whatever,
and it could probably become a vicious cycle, right? And the thing is, like, maybe your sleep was effortless before, but all of a sudden now it's like you gotta really, sleep hygiene becomes more important, doing the right kind of combination of things.
Yeah, and maybe to no fault of hers, right? Because that's just it. It's literally that estrogen progesterone flip flop, and the fact that now they're both going really, really low.
Yeah.
It makes a big difference, and it can be so frustrating because you're doing all the things, you're keeping the room cool, you're avoiding the blue lights,
red
right?
light
You're
at
doing
night.
you're doing the red light glasses, or avoiding screens altogether and just reading or doing the calm bath, and you still can't sleep.
Yeah.
I get it. It's like super overwhelming, and that's where honestly, when I have folks come in like that, we do have a lot of cortisol discussions.
Yeah.
Because is there a stress component that we've missed?
Do you need some phosphatidylserine, which can block cortisol?
I mean, there's just, So there's so many pieces there.
And so circling back a little bit, because we kind of talked about some of the supplements and things like that, but diet-wise, what are kind of your recommendations, especially with things like fats and and essential fatty acids, and what are kind of your sort of basic, if you have a basic rules of the road kind of deal?
Well, and I did, I really like doing healthy fats no matter what, right? So if you can get your diet, and as much as we can, we try to do through diet, right? You and I both do that. Like sometimes we supplement because we can't absolutely get enough, but our goal is always through diet. So that first half of your cycle, when you are in that follicular stage, our body doesn't really like that blood sugar spike. The estrogen doesn't really like it. So eating foods that are lower on the glycemic index and really like the healthy fats. So olive oil, flaxseed, avocados, right?
So protein the whole way is a common theme the whole way through.
You need protein the whole month. Yep,
but we don't get enough. Especially during that phase, then you'd say like maybe bump up the good fats and go to like more, either real whole grains, 100% whole, or just veggies, kind of stay away from the real starchy processed carbs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially during that first couple of weeks. So follicular stage. Second stage is again because here's when we're in that stress piece, right? And that stress makes such a big difference. And so, but blood sugar isn't as like we always want to watch blood sugar. By all means, I'm not saying oh my gosh, go eat a whatever. But here is where having some more of those like starchy foods is better. Like your body's
add in your sweet potato, add in your regular potatoes.
Yeah. And again, keeping, we always want the cruciferous veggies. They can actually do a lot for detoxing extra estrogen if we're having issues. But always still want the healthy fats. And then the protein, like we both mentioned, doesn't go away.
Yep.
Whether we wanted to or not. Yeah. So
okay, so we talked about exercise, we talked about sleep, we talked about nutrition.
Diet,
How about this is a whole rabbit hole we won't go down super deep, but how about the environmental pieces? Including like the hormone, the estrogen
disruptors.
Yeah, the endocrine disruptors. I can't talk today. And how do you think that, and living in this modern world, how do you think that's potentially impacting things like perimenopause and menopause?
Right. Well, we know, the endocrine disruptors are out there, right? And so when we talk about that, things that I immediately go to, because of the world that I kind of see a lot of, right, are perfumes, all the lotions, cosmetics. I saw a study that said, we're exposed on average to 13 different chemicals, like right after we get out of the shower. But if you think about it, your shampoo, conditioner, body wash, whatever you put in your hair,
Moisturizer.
and then your face, your
Makeup.
moisturizer, your makeup. I mean, there's just a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so really looking into all of that and what you're using. What do you use to clean? What are you using to clean your home? What are you washing your clothes in? You know, like what kind of laundry detergent? But the one of the overwhelming ones for me, for women, really are the scents that we're wearing. So it's the perfumes and the body lotions. And I mean, it's just, they are adding up at such a high level.
Yeah.
You know, and we know.
So phthalates,
Yep.
which are endocrine disruptors,
Parabens, yep.
parabens, BPA, and its analogs.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we do testing, right? We'll do total tox testing and see this in people's urine. Like they're processing it and getting it out.
And I use that EWG
yeah.
app, you know, what's it called? Live Clean or
well, it's Environmental Working Group, and it's Skin Deep.
What's that? And they'll look. I have the app on my phone.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a healthy living.
Healthy
Is
Living,
the
okay,
app.
yep.
Yep. And you can scan products, and it'll tell you like 1 is good, and then if it's like a 4 or 5, and you kind of it's in the red zone. You're like, well, there's probably a lot of chemicals in it. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, sunscreens, right? I mean, there's just so many things, and just again, we're just saying, be aware.
Yep.
Like, look.
Be aware. Just try to make a few better choices at a time.
Yeah.
You know, to kind of decrease that toxic burden, because that, you know, again, if that could really be contributing to probably the instability of hormones.
Right. And we're not
and
perfect.
cancer risk.
Right. And we're not perfect. We
No,
know that.
no.
So like you're never
can't
gonna
be.
and you're never gonna get it all out. So don't do that. But just being cognizant of what you're exposing yourself to, right?
Yep.
Or your kids to. And you know, another thing I'm just gonna add right here since we're talking about it is that women so often are putting themselves last. Right. And so it's like, I'm taking care of my kids. I'm taking care of my family. I'm taking care of my job. I'm doing all of this. And then, you know, now is the time, if you haven't been, like, put yourself first, you know, allow yourself to go to the gym. Allow yourself to take that walk. Allow yourself to get the food and eat the food you want to eat.
Well, advocate for yourself in the healthcare setting too.
Yes. Yeah. When you
know?
go in and you're like, something is wrong, you know, I don't feel right. Make sure, you know, have labs drawn, or, you know, come see us at Functional Medicine Associates, right?
Yeah, just somebody who understands it, who really is like not just giving a cursory glance or dismissive about, meh.
Right.
Know,
like, you're in perimenopause.
Yeah, just
like,
roll with it.
This is what your body does. It's supposed to do it.
Because
right?
more and more there are things we can do.
Right. And the heart disease, you know, we didn't even really talk about the cardiac risk, like with the lack of estrogen, right? It's a big deal. And so not having that is not having the estrogen can really increase your risk.
Yeah.
So
starting to look like Alzheimer's prevention,
Yes.
heart disease prevention, you know, other thing, cancer prevention, all these things. I think it just, you know, deserves more than just a cursory.
right, glance.
Yep.
Yeah. Like, oh no, this is what it is. All right, see ya. So speaking of that, I guess we could talk about a couple of the things that you could do. We'll just have a real high level conversation, and people can visit with their healthcare provider, obviously, about specific questions to themselves. But so there are different adaptogens that we can use, right? And so I know you and I both use some for folks even with anxiety, right? Or cortisol, and so they're not specific to perimenopause. They just can also be helpful.
Adaptogens being certain herbs that are can sort of like go where the body needs them, which, you know, on surface level sounds a bit woo and like eye rolling, but there's actually a bunch of research coming out on things like ashwagandha for a host of disorders, and, you know, with pretty significant potential benefits,
right? Yeah,
and low downside. So there's things like that you were mentioning could have use as well.
Ashwagandha, so that's another one. So that one is kind of a precursor to hormones. It can increase that luteinizing hormone, that LH, that we need to ovulate. It also reduces cortisol, right? It can help clear up brain fog. You know, so one of the things,
it's definitely a brain herb for sure.
We use it. It can help with lipid control, blood sugar. And again, there's certain doses. Sometimes we're real careful with it if we have thyroid antibodies. So, you know, I always recommend visiting with your healthcare provider before starting anything, but it is one that can be super helpful.
Yep.
Holy basil, rhodiola, both of those can help kind of reduce stress, anxiety, brain fog. You know, there's reasons not to take it too. So again.
Yeah. No, one size does not fit all.
Right. Yeah. Schisandra is a phytoestrogen, and it helps again with mental clarity and endurance. I've seen this one super helpful for people. You definitely would take that in the morning because it can impair your sleep at night. So, again, you got to be careful with it.
Yeah.
Maca root, anti-inflammatory and a hormone modulator. But again, that one is not a good one to do with thyroid meds, and it's banned by the World Doping Agency. So if you are an athlete that's competing at that level, you would not want to use that.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Weird, right? So that would be just, kind of the over-the-counter natural options.
And then shouldn't be controversial, but HRT.
Right, yeah. So HRT, hormonal replacement therapy, right? For a long time, so it started out, people were kind of using it, and then that whole Women's Health Initiative study came out, which had some flaws. And the main estrogen they studied was a Premarin, which we really don't use anymore. And so they had
derived from horse urine.
Yep. If you
right, isn't that
Yep. So if you have a uterus, you have to have progesterone. And so they had a estrogen progesterone arm, and then they had an estrogen only arm. But the average age of women that they enrolled in the study was 63. And so we know that if you're going to start hormone replacement therapy, you want to start it within 10 years of menopause. So they were already, because, we talked about that being 51, they're already past that. And then what they were really looking at was, hey, is estrogen beneficial for heart disease? And so they were starting with a group that probably already had some comorbidities, right? And they weren't really clearly marked.
And already went through that estrogen withdrawal phase.
And then reinitiated
Yeah.
it. So, but when that came out, it got blown up. And so the news outlets picked it up right away. Everyone stopped using estrogen, progesterone, and they just ran from hormones like it was a building on fire.
Based on some not great data.
Yeah. And so now, I'm not saying it's for everyone. By all means, it's not. And it's not, people might not even want to take it. No worries. It's just something you should know that, like, hey, this is an option out there, and maybe it would help.
Yep.
There's a lot of ways to take it. There's a lot of ways to have the conversation. Sometimes we do estrogen. Sometimes we do both. I like giving progesterone just because it also helps people sleep usually. And then we can give testosterone too.
Yeah.
So
I've been seeing that more and more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And obviously at very sensible, safe, physiologic replacement doses.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They don't have to be crazy doses. And again, women were not used to having high doses of this.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah.
But yeah, so we, it's worth a conversation. Like you're not just stuck into this perimenopause, menopause world where you have to just ride it.
I think it's such an important time to be plugged in with a good provider who gets it, who's looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah. And there are,
Absolutely.
We do have a lot of amazing providers, and even up here in our valley, we're really lucky. But throughout, the U.S., there are awesome providers. But it's worth asking. Like, hey, do you know about... And there's a little bit right now, they're calling it HRT, but they're also calling it menopausal hormone therapy.
Okay.
And so there's, a little bit of sometimes a shift in the discussion, but it just depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
But calling and asking, hey, do you guys do HRT at your facility? And if not, and you're interested in it, maybe keep looking.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I think all good stuff.
But again, that's just that one piece, right? That's just that, the hormonal component. It's not, you got to address the whole picture, like you and I talk about all the time.
Look at all the pillars and try to really balance the whole system.
Yeah, and we could talk for hours just on on hormones alone. So we won't.
No, I think it's a good kind of starter overview.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we'll pick some other things up and do deeper dives on some future episodes.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess on that note, thanks for listening to the Aware Families podcast. And like us, share if you know people that might be interested in the stuff that we're talking about, kind of this, functional medicine, but from like a more of a family-oriented perspective. That's what we're all about.
Yep.
Or come see us at Functional Medicine Associates in Kalispell, Montana.
Yep. We'd love to see you. Thanks again.
All right, thanks again. Bye-bye.